Tom Riddle was born into a world without ever knowing love. The day he was born, his mother passed away, and his father had abandoned them long before his birth. Tom grew up in an orphanage, deprived of the warmth of a family, surrounded by loneliness and neglect. The cold and dark world around him was incapable of even explaining what love was. No one held his hand. No one told him, "You are important." This lack of love deeply affected Tom. It made him lose trust in the world and fear forming bonds with others. Could a child who grew up without love ever show love to others? Even as a child, Tom felt different from the others. He could do things that other children couldn't. Move objects with his thoughts, influence others with his will. However, these abilities didn't bring him happiness. They only brought him isolation. Those around him rejected him out of fear, and in return, Tom began to see himself as superior. "I am different from them," he thought. But this difference created a profound loneliness within him. When he was accepted to Hogwarts, he hoped he could find a place for himself in the world. However, even here, he was excluded because of his bloodline. His father's being a Muggle was a source of great shame for him. To suppress this shame, he rejected his own past. His desire to prove himself in the world of pure-blood wizards led him down a dark path. Tom Riddle created a new identity to erase his past: Lord Voldemort. Now he would no longer be ashamed of his bloodline, nor would he ever feel weak again. For someone who had never known love, could the concept of love have any meaning? When Dumbledore told him that love was the most powerful magic, Voldemort simply laughed. Because for him, love was a weakness. He had seen people suffer because of love, develop vulnerabilities. To him, love was just a fairy tale that the weak clung to. How could he believe in something he had never experienced in his life? Voldemort had suffered greatly from chaos and a lack of control throughout his life. He was pushed around in the orphanage, always left alone in his youth. Therefore, he decided to do everything he could to control his own world. He sought to create order by instilling fear in others. To him, people could not be governed without fear. This order might seem cruel, but for Voldemort, fear was the only antidote to chaos. He thought he was protecting the world from his own fears, but his greatest fear was death. The little boy, Tom, left orphaned by his mother's death, believed that death was the end of everything. Fleeing from death became an obsession for him. When Voldemort began to search for immortality, it was not just a quest for power. Death, in his eyes, was as frightening as love. A life without love was no different from death, and he wanted to escape both. His ideology of pure-blood supremacy was actually a reflection of the shame he felt about his own roots. His father had abandoned him because he was a Muggle. Voldemort tried to erase this shame by rejecting his roots and despising Muggles. This was part of his effort to prove himself. His pure-blood ideology was not just a belief, but a reflection of the hatred he had for his own identity. Voldemort harbored anger towards people's weaknesses and fears. He knew he was stronger than them and chose to fight against these weaknesses in their place. He believed that love weakened people. To him, people were enslaved by their weaknesses, and these weaknesses were plunging the world into chaos. Voldemort wanted to change that order. In the end, however, his story was not just about power and fear, but a deep tragedy. Tom Riddle was a child who had never known love. Perhaps if someone had reached out to him in time, had shown him that love was not a weakness but a strength, his story might have been entirely different. But no one did. The lack of love transformed him into a dark soul. Voldemort instilled fear, caused pain, and brought death. But behind all of this, he was fighting against the chaos and lovelessness within him. Sadly, he could not escape his greatest fears, death and loneliness. Perhaps Voldemort was not as evil as we thought. Maybe he was a victim of the dark sides of the system and human nature. Will we now only see him as a figure of evil? Or will we consider the tragedy behind that figure and reflect on the existence of a soul that was wronged?